the years A, B, and C, we hear from Matthew, Mark, and Luke, what are known as the Synoptic Gospels. And they have a certain rhythm in common and a way of telling the story that is similar. Then comes the Gospel of John, and John gets kind of sprinkled throughout A, B, and C, and John is totally weird. John tells the story in John's own way, with John's own timing. He gets all the facts messed up, and he adds all kinds of fascinating characters. And part of that is because John is being written much later. And John is not so much repeating the cherished stories of Jesus from Jesus' own day, as he is interpreting the teachings and life of Jesus as they have been revealed through the community that has followed Jesus since his resurrection. So in a sense, we are meeting the resurrected Christ in the Gospel of John. And he's speaking to a toddler church, a church that has been around for a couple of generations, that is now no longer a Jewish movement, but a Jewish and Gentile movement together. And he's addressing a community of people that have established rituals. They have a way of doing things. Baptism and Eucharist pretty much look in John's community like they look to us now. I mean, probably not an altar, probably still a table, and probably not people sitting in pews like this. But in the main, this business of breaking the bread and drinking the wine has become less of a meal and more of a ritual meal. And baptism has come to be taken a little more for granted. It is now no longer merely adult converts who are coming to Christianity, but the children of adult converts. And so people are growing up in the church, and it's become a little bit more of an established thing. And you know what? People have begun to take it for granted. So John writes his gospel to remind people, to remind his community of what Jesus was really up to. And that's why Jesus says all these weird things that he doesn't say in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and does these unusual things. Because John is trying to open our eyes to the subtext that people have begun to miss, and trying to help people enter more deeply, more profoundly into what it means to be faithful, for they've already started going through the motions. And hence we have these wonderful characters of Nicodemus and the woman at the well. And they're back to back, not just in the lectionary, but in John itself. These two stories come one right after another. And John is very self-conscious. I mean, this is more like a novel than it is anything else. John is very clear about his details and how he places the events in his story. So John wants us to notice that this woman is not Nicodemus. Nicodemus is the privileged, educated insider who sneaks in by night because he doesn't want to wreck his reputation, but he does want to check this Jesus out. And he's very cautious, and he argues with Jesus. John makes him look kind of stupid, but it's probably just because he's resistant, you know. He's really just, throwing it back at Jesus. In contrast, here is the Samaritan woman, could not be possibly farther outside acceptability, except for the fact that she's been married 5 times and is now living with a man. So now she's as far on the opposite end of the scale as Nicodemus is on his end. A completely unacceptable partner for conversation with a Jewish rabbi. And yet they have this marvelous dialogue. And not that there's no pushback from her, but as she pushes back, she opens up. And her trust in him grows. And her willingness willingness to engage his new ideas grows, and the sense of her enjoying their relationship grows, and the wonder of the conversation develops. And all of this happens at a well. We are so spoiled when it comes to water. I think about that story we heard when we were celebrating Episcopal Relief and Development Sunday about the little girl who was missing out on school because she had to spend so much time drawing water for her family. That was her job for her family. And it took so long to get to the water and back and to have enough for everyone. And I think of all those folks in Japan who would be grateful right now for access to safe drinking water. I used to live in near Wairika and near Mount Shasta, and the well water out there was amazing because the glacier melt would come down through the lava tubes and get filtered and come up, miles away from the mountain in these wonderful little springs, and it was just crystalline and really cold and magic, just magic. So Jesus is hot and thirsty and tired after a long walk. The disciples have gone into town to get something to eat, and he's alone there by Jacob's well, and he has this conversation with this woman. And the well is placed there very intentionally by John. The water that Jesus is talking about is that Mount Shasta kind of water. And it comes from a depth, an incredible depth, much deeper than those lava tubes that run under Siskiyou County. The depth that Jesus is referencing goes back beyond the days of the patriarchs. Jacob's well, this is. From the prehistory of Israel. And the water was there before Jacob. As if to say, this water goes back before the beginning, to the very creation of the planet. This is the sacred water of the source. This is the very water of God. And this is the water of our baptism. John's narrative takes us through the metaphorical journey from baptism to Eucharist. And he's asking us to go back to that source and remember how incredibly precious it is. For he says, once you've been baptized, once you've tasted of this water, you now have from within a living well, and nothing can take that away from you. And that water will spring up and quench your thirst day after day after day for the rest of your life and into eternity. You have begun a journey. You have tapped into the source. And that source flows through you. Remember that. Remember that. Be this thirsty woman. And taste this living water that is available to you every day of your life. We get kind of blasé about our baptism. John says, wake up to the precious connection to the depths that is yours. Waken to God's love for you, God's infinite love for you, God's purpose for your life, and the reality that you are deeply connected to God, and therefore everything has meaning.